I wake before dawn, the sky still ink dark beyond the window. My first thought is always of Sarah, her soft whistle, as she measured out those 3 generous scoops of coffee grounds into our copper-colored percolator. I stand now at the counter, a trembling hand reaching for the familiar French press, and I measure the grounds myself. 3 heaping tablespoons, exactly 200 milliliters of water. A careful pinch of salt. Every morning I follow the ritual as she taught me, as if the precise proportions might conjure her back. They never do. The coffee tastes thin, almost metallic, as though it knows she's gone. I lean against the edge of the counter and wait for the rich aroma to fill the little kitchen. In the quiet, I can imagine her stirring slowly, humming that old Bing Crosby tune, "Smile, Though Your Heart Is Aching," while she poured that first cup for me. I reach for my favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle that she insisted I never replace. "It's got character," she said, "just like you." Now the chipped rim feels like the last stubborn piece of her laughter, cracked but comforting. As the coffee drips, I let my mind wander back 50 years to the day I first saw her in that crowded college cafeteria. She'd been perched on a stool sketching the Capitol dome in charcoal, her dark curls pinned back with a pencil. I spilled my tray trying to catch her eye. She only smiled, offered me her napkin, and in that moment, everything changed. Every morning we shared coffee strong enough to wake the dead, as she liked to joke, and every evening we sipped it again over laughter stories and plans we never thought would end. The press finally gurgles its last, and I pour the coffee into my mug. The steam curls up like a ghost of her whisper, "Good morning, sweetheart." I cup the mug and bring it to my lips. The first sip is bitter, but I swallow it anyway, tasting regret and longing. I carry it to the small wooden table by the window, the one we built together. Its surface is worn where our elbows rested through countless conversations about mortgage payments. The twins' first day of school, her dream to open a gallery. Now, it holds only my footprints of memory. I sit down and cradle the mug, feeling its warmth seep into my palms. Outside, the world is still half asleep. A single cardinal flits to the bird bath out back, dipping his red crest for a drink. I think of the morning Sarah kept bird seed in a jar by that same window. For company, she'd say, tracing the window pane with her fingertip. I miss her habit of sliding into the seat across from me before sunrise. Her hair tousled as she rubbed her eyes. She'd nudge me playfully, announce, "Your turn to tell me the news." Nowadays, my only news is the ache in my bones and the empty chair. The clock on the wall, one of our wedding gifts, ticks audibly, a metronome for this lonely symphony. I place my newspaper face down, unwilling to read headlines when I can barely handle my own. Instead, I close my eyes and let the rhythm of the ticking soothe me. A knock on the door startles me. For a second, my heart leaps. I imagine Emily, my daughter, standing there, apologetic for missing their grandmother's funeral. But through the window blinds, I see nobody. Just the pale glow of the street lamp fading in the early light. I rise carefully, fold my mug into the sink, and walk downstairs to the front door. The hallway is dim, the carpeting soft under my slippers. I rest a hand on the banister, remembering how Sarah used to press her cheek to the wood grain, marking the day she found out she was pregnant with Emily. "We're making a little artist," she beamed. That moment felt more real than most others, yet today it's as distant as a half-remembered dream. Back in the kitchen, I fill the sink with hot soapy water and wash the mug, turning it gently so the chipped handle doesn't catch. I set it on the drying rack and stare at it. I can taste her in the chipped rim, feel her in the heat of the porcelain. But I know, just as I always know, that she isn't coming back to reclaim her place here. I turn away from the sink to find a faded photograph perched on the windowsill, Sarah in her favorite blue dress, laughing as I chase the twins around the yard. Their faces are blurred by motion, but hers is crystal clear, joyful, radiant. Underneath, she'd written in flowing script, "Our best days are still ahead." It was true then. Now it hurts to read. I wipe my hands on a dish towel and pick up the photograph, holding it close. I close my eyes and whisper, "I miss you." My voice trembles, echoing off the cabinets. The kitchen feels colder, emptier, and for a moment I imagine her footsteps in the hallway behind me. "I'm here," she'd say, "just waiting for you." But when I turn, there's only the edge of the countertop, the plain white walls, and the sunlight creeping into the corners. I slide the photo back to its spot, take a last sip of lukewarm coffee, and set the empty mug aside. As I walk toward the front door again, the day feels both like an ending and a beginning. My bones ache, my heart aches, but I have to step into the world without her. Sarah always said that grief is love preserved in absence. If that's true, then I carry her with me, 3 scoops of memory, 200 milliliters of longing, and the tiniest pinch of salt to remind me of how bittersweet life can be. I open the door, step onto the front porch, and the morning air greets me with a gentle chill. The day is new, and though her laugh has faded, the echoes guide me forward. I close the door softly behind me and walk down the path, ready somehow to live another day. I closed the door behind me, the echo of my footsteps fading into the hallway as I left the kitchen behind. The morning's ritual felt hollow now, as if I had rinsed life itself out of that chipped mug. I paced the narrow hallway toward the living room, the scent of damp linen ghosting along the walls where Mom's casket had rested. My heart pounded with fresh grief, a raw ache that tightened around my ribs. Emily stood by the hearth, her arms folded, eyes distant. She wore a tailored charcoal suit, no doubt chosen to convey gravity, and her posture was rigid, as if she'd practiced this moment in front of a mirror. Behind her, the plush couch where Mom and I had spent Sunday mornings together looked absurdly large and empty. The flicker of the TV, muted, showed images of our hometown's church and pews lined with unfamiliar faces. "Dad," Emily said, her voice clipped, "this house is too big for you." She sank onto the arm of the couch, tucking one ankle beneath her other leg as though cocooning herself against discomfort. "Maybe you should consider a care home." Her words landed like stones in a still pool. The ripples spread and swallowed me. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Care home. I'd never allowed either of my parents to entertain the idea, but the sting was real hotter than any funeral sermon. I closed my eyes, inhaled the faint trace of lilies mixed with dust, and forced a calm tone. "Emily, Mom's body isn't even cold yet," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And you're already measuring my worth in square footage." She shrugged, as if disappointed I'd taken offense. "I'm just being practical." She smoothed a lock of hair behind her ear. "You're 78, Dad. You'll need help sooner or later. Why not make plans now, while you're still capable?" I sank onto the opposite end of the couch, rocking forward slightly until my knees protested. The springboard of the cushion lamented under my weight. In that instant I saw not my daughter, but a stranger in Mom's skin, smiling mechanically, but lacking warmth. "Make plans," I repeated, my voice louder than I intended. "You mean sell the house I built with your mother, the one we raised you in, the one we fixed up board by board?" She pursed her lips. "Why shouldn't I? It's just money, Dad. You wouldn't use the equity. You could downsize, move closer to town, maybe near one of those senior communities with bingo nights and planned lunches." She paused. as though waiting for me to see the wisdom of it. I felt a flash of anger. So, I'm bingo fodder now. Planned lunches. You think I want strangers spoon-feeding me canned peaches while you nip off to the office? I jabbed a finger toward her. Your mother had dreams of opening a gallery in this living room. Do you remember that? She shifted uncomfortably. Memories are just that, memories. My heart clenched. Memories weren't nothing. They were bone and blood. They were laughter at midnight arguments over leaky faucets, warm hugs, when one of us fell ill. I closed my eyes and pictured Mom's lilting laugh across the front porch, the smell of her wildflower garden drifting through the screen door. My vision blurred. I remember Emily. I said quietly, leaning forward. I remember your mother, standing right here in this room sketching that mural of the Yellowstone Mountains. You and I sat on that rug building Lincoln logs while she painted. And you know what she said when I balked at spending money on art supplies? She looked away, fiddling with the hem of her jacket. She loved her art, Dad. She said, I said, forcing the memory through tears, some things aren't investments. Some things are vital. Do you know how vital this house was to her? To us. Emily's shoulders dropped, but her expression hardened again. She looked at me with a practiced empathy that stung deeper than indifference. Dad, I know you're hurting, but grief isn't an excuse to ignore reality. I rose from the couch and started pacing again, each step a testament to muscles weary with sorrow and age. Reality is more than practicality. Reality is love. Reality is legacy. If you see this house as a burden, then you never understood what it took to build it. She rose to follow me, perching on the edge of a coffee table, as if on an auditorium stage. I did understand, she said, which is why I'm worried about you. You fell 3 weeks ago getting the mail and didn't tell me about it for 2 days. You burnt dinner last week. You left the iron on overnight. I pressed a palm to my forehead. The guilt sank in. I had stumbled. I had forgotten. But that didn't make me helpless. Accidents happen, Emily, I said. I'm not helpless. Your mother and I got up 2 flights of stairs to tuck you in when you were a kid. We survived flood's tornado warnings that time the basement flooded and you panicked. We told you it'd be fine because it was. Her eyes softened for a moment, a flicker of her childhood self, bright-eyed, quick to laugh, but it vanished under the veneer of adulthood. I just don't want to lose you, she murmured. The sincerity in her voice nearly broke me, but resentment surged. So you think shipping me off to some fluorescent corridor of bingo and frozen meatloaf will keep me safe? I don't want to be safe. I want to be alive. And this house, every floorboard, every window, every scratch on the door, tells me I'm alive. She stood and crossed the room, placing a hand on my arm. I'm sorry, Dad. Her voice cracked. She looked genuine for the first time, but then she swallowed hard, straightened and added, I need to get back to the hotel. I've got meetings to prepare for. Without another glance, she strode to the door. My throat tightened as I watched her go, the click of her heels on the hardwood, echoing like a door slamming shut in my mind. I answered the door without thinking, empty hallway. No corridor maid, no porter, just the muted hum of the chandelier in the foyer. My chest ached, not from grief, but from betrayal. I returned to the couch and sank into its hold. The muted television flickered, showing a distant image of the funeral procession outside. The funeral home had delivered flowers, lilies, and peonies in shades of white, and a framed photograph of my wife smiling, framed by the soft glow of candlelight. I reached for the remote and pressed mute, silencing the world. My breath shuddered and I closed my eyes. I could hear Mom's voice, gentle and strong. "Build your life with love, not bricks." She'd said that while sweeping paint from her brushes. Bricks crumble, but love is forever. Tears slipped down my cheeks as I wondered how long I could stand on my own 2 feet in this house filled with echoes of a family that once was. Emily's cold offer of a care home felt like an indictment of my love of my life's work. But deep in my chest, beneath grief and anger, a spark of resolve ignited. I leaned over and picked up Mom's framed photo. Her eyes seemed alive in the glass, encouraging, patient. I pressed my lips to the surface. "I won't leave this house," I whispered. "Not today. Not for Emily's sake." I set the photo back, picked up the remote, and turned off the television completely. Silence returned, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like space opening up for the next chapter, one I would walk into on my own terms in the home built by love, not fear. When the phone rang that afternoon, I was in the living room flipping through Mom's old photo albums. My fingers paused on a faded snapshot of Emily as a toddler clutching a polka-dot balloon, Mom laughing at her side. My breath caught. I hadn't thought about birthdays or balloons or laughter in years. When I answered, part of me expected silence. "Hello, Dad." "It's me, Emily." Her voice was smooth, practiced. My heart pounded in my chest. 5 years of unanswered calls and unreturned emails yanked free a memory of hope and hurt. I cleared my throat. "Emily." There was a brief pause, as if she was measuring my reaction, gauging whether I was still fragile or too gruff to entertain pleasantries. Then she said, "Michael and I want you to join us in Maine next month. We've rented a cottage on the coast near Kennebunkport. We'd love to have you." I held the photo album in my lap, my fingers trembling. "A cottage in Maine," I echoed. My voice sounded brittle like thin glass. "Yes," she said, her tone quickening with enthusiasm. "We know you love the ocean with Mom. It's beautiful this time of year. We thought it might be good for you to get away from Fargo for a bit. Change of scenery. Some fresh air." I glanced at the window where afternoon light spilled across the hardwood floors. The house felt suddenly vast, echoing with memories. A change of scenery. I remembered how Mom used to chase gulls on the beach, her laughter carried off by the breeze. I remembered the way she encouraged me to dip my toes in the Atlantic, even though the water was painfully cold. My chest tightened. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, tucking the album to one side. "Let me think about it." "Of course," she replied, though her voice betrayed a note of impatience. Just a flicker, but enough to set my skin on edge. "We're booking the cottage this week. Let me know by Friday." I swallowed. "Okay. Friday." She hung up before I could say anything else. The dial tone buzzed in my ear, a hollow reminder of the silence that had stretched between us for half a decade. I set the phone down and stared at the album, at the girl with a balloon and the mother with painted nails. I felt torn between longing for family and fear of being used again. Care home, house too big, silent calls. I rose and walked to the kitchen as if moving would clear the fog in my mind. I poured myself a glass of ginger ale and sat at the table, hands wrapped around the cool glass. The sun slanted through the window, glinting on the water droplets clinging to the countertop. I closed my eyes, tasting the sharp sweetness, and let my thoughts drift back to Mom's gallery dreams, to the nights we talked about traveling the coast, to the promise that family was everything. I shook off the memories and downed the drink in one gulp. The burn of carbonation snapped me back. I forced a shaky breath and reached for my calendar, the one on the refrigerator with cartoon fish and marching lobsters. I flipped to August next month and stared at the blank squares. Friday loomed an unmarked deadline. What did I want? Company, forgiveness, or simply a way to confront the ache of emptiness Emily had offered an olive branch wrapped in salt spray and granite cliffs? But was it genuine? Or another plan to study my reactions to calculate how quickly I'd pack my bags? I set the calendar aside and called Michael's number from an old business card tucked in the drawer. It rang twice before he picked up. "Hello, Mr. Thompson. This is Robert Oberon Hollis." He cleared his throat. "Oh, Mr. Hollis. Hello. Emily mentioned you might call." His voice was polite but guarded. "I just wanted to confirm the details," I said. "Dates, location, accommodations." Michael rattled off the cottage's address in Kennebunkport, described the layout. 3 bedrooms, ocean view, fully equipped kitchen, and mentioned the rental agreement. "We'll pick you up in Fargo on the 15th at 8 in the morning. Cabin check-in is at 3, but we thought we'd drive straight through with stops along the way." I nodded at the phone, even though he couldn't see me. "All right. And should I bring anything special?" He hesitated, then said, "Just your clothes, medications, passport, credit card, whatever you need. The cottage has linens, towels, everything." I closed my eyes at the list of things I'd have to gather. My passports, the one from my Navy days faded and worn, my credit card, which I rarely used anymore. I imagined packing a small duffel, squeezing in familiar items, feeling the suitcase thump against the hallway walls as I dragged it to the front door. "Thank you," I said, careful not to let my voice wobble. "I'll be ready." He cleared his throat again, politeness closing the conversation. "Great. See you on the 15th. I hung up and closed my eyes. My heart thundered. The cottage, the ocean. Emily's invitation, was it a lifeline or a trap? I went into my bedroom and opened the closet. My wardrobe had narrowed to soft wool cardigan slacks that fit loosely shirts without stains. I pulled out my best gray sport coat, one I wore at weddings and funerals, and draped it over the bed. I sorted through drawers for enough shirts and socks, folding them carefully. I found my passport tucked into an inside pocket of my desk drawer. I found my old Navy veteran's ID, then realized I'd never used it on trips. I packed a small leather toiletry bag, electric razor comb, toothpaste slipped in a toothbrush that still held Sarah's lipstick stain, and zipped it shut. Then I placed my medications in a pill organizer, blood pressure, cholesterol, a vitamin D supplement, and set them beside the bag. I felt a flash of vulnerability at seeing the tiny amber bottles, reminders of the body that Sarah had tended to, that Emily had judged. I paused, hand resting on the suitcase's handle. My gut churned with doubt. I thought of the mornings when Emily hadn't shown up for Mom's funeral, of the sting of her care home suggestion. I thought of meals where she had chastised me for burnt toast or forgotten appointments. Could I trust her now? But I also thought of the empty days and long evenings I spent hunched over the photo albums of the silence that swallowed me whole. I thought of the gulls circling over crashing waves, their squeals cutting through haze as if calling me home. I closed the suitcase with a soft click. My reflection shimmered in the mirror, a man older than he felt, but determined to book a seat beside his daughter. I took a deep breath and sat on the edge of the bed, tracing the edge of my passport cover with trembling fingers. I let my resolve settle like morning fog rolling off the sea. I would go. I would face the tides, both of the ocean and of emotions I'd buried long ago. I would see Emily, look her in the eye, and find out if this trip was an olive branch or a spear. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Emily. "Can't wait to see you, Dad. Love, E." I stared at the message. Love. 2 simple words carrying a weight I hadn't felt in years. I pressed reply with 4 letters of my own. Me too. I set the phone down, turned out the lamp, and lay back on the pillow. The ceiling fan hummed and I closed my eyes, imagining the Atlantic wind on my face, the taste of salt on my lips. I pictured the cottage's windows facing the horizon, Emily and Michael waiting on the doorstep. In the darkness I whispered, "Let this be real," and drifted into a dream of waves and possibility. I woke before dawn again, my suitcase loaded by the front door, the roar of the SUV already humming in the driveway. I pulled on my best gray jacket, threadbare at the elbows, but the only one I owned that still fit the shape of me, and lumbered toward the vehicle. The morning air bit at my cheeks, sharp and bracing, and I inhaled deeply, reminding myself that I was about to step into a new chapter with Emily and Michael. Michael climbed down from the driver's seat, his polished loafers clicking against the concrete, and offered me a hand as I climbed in. He had that easy confidence of a man used to commanding construction crews, clipboard in hand, but in his eyes I saw a hint of calculation. I waved his proffered hand off with a wry grin. "I've still got my sea legs," I joked, settling into the back seat behind him. Emily slid in on the passenger side, her heels clicking as she stepped up. She paused, took a long look at my jacket, pinched her lips together, and said, "You can't wear that, Dad. You'll catch cold in that old thing." She held out a silky navy scarf as if offering me a lifesaver. I took it gingerly, draping it around my neck. "Thanks, sweetheart," I said, though I knew she saw it as another opportunity to remake me in her image. Michael shot me a sideways grin as he closed the back door. I tried to laugh, but it felt tight in my throat. We pulled onto the highway, the SUV's tires roaring over asphalt as the early light stretched pink and gold across the horizon. I watched the buildings of Fargo recede, the flat plains rolling out like a patchwork quilt. I felt a twinge of excitement tinged with dread, because this trip felt less like a vacation and more like an audition. I had to prove I could still keep up, still belong. Emily unfolded a map on her lap, tracing our route with a manicured finger. "We'll stop in Minneapolis for lunch," she said, not looking up. "There's a place I read about farm-to-table organic options. You should like it." I glanced at Michael, who tapped the steering wheel with a smirk as if betting on my reaction. "Dad, any preferences?" Emily asked me finally. I cleared my throat. "Fish, if it's fresh, or a good burger." Emily raised an eyebrow, then turned to Michael. "He's eating fish," under her breath, "unless it burns the place down." I heard the jab and I felt a heat rise behind my eyes. 2 hours later, we pulled up to a sleek, glass-fronted cafe on the edge of Minneapolis's uptown district. Inside, pale wood tables gleamed and potted ferns hung from the ceiling. Emily led me to a table by the window, her heels clicking over the hardwood. I settled into the booth and unfolded my napkin. Michael slid in across from me, already scrolling through his phone. I glanced at the printed menu. The fish specials looked appealing: pan-seared trout with lemon basil sauce. I cleared my throat. "I'll have the trout, please." Emily shot me a look that stung sharper than any words. "Dad, you know you have a sensitive stomach." She tapped the menu. "Soup of the day, tomato bisque, or maybe something simpler like the roasted vegetable bowl." I frowned. "I haven't had fish in years," I began. She cut me off. "Just this once, Dad." And she turned her back to me, texting on her phone. Michael glanced up, eyebrows raised. "Heh, we wouldn't want a repeat of that Olive Garden mess," he drawled, recalling the time I'd spilled marinara sauce across the tablecloth and set off the restaurant's fire alarm. I forced a tight smile and nodded. The waiter arrived, and Emily ordered for me 1 tomato bisque and a side salad, no croutons. My mouth went dry. I folded the menu and set it aside, Michael closed his phone and leaned forward. "You okay, sir?" I managed a shrug. "Just fine." But my heart pounded. I realized then this trip wasn't about recreation, it was about control. They wanted to determine every corner of my day, every bite I ate, every jacket I wore. And I let them. Lunch arrived swiftly, a crimson bowl of soup and a pale green salad. I lifted the spoon and tasted the bisque. It was creamy, well-seasoned, but I could taste the shame behind each swallow. Emily sipped her kale smoothie with an air of victory, while Michael tucked into a grass-fed burger. I forced myself to eat, chewing slowly, my eyes flicking to the window as cars roared by on the street outside. "So, Dad," Emily began conversationally, "how are you feeling about the trip so far?" "Excited." She folded her hands primly on the table. I swallowed. "It's a beautiful day," I said, "and the drive's been comfortable." I tried to meet her eyes to find some warmth, but the tension between us felt thick and unbridgeable. Michael set down his burger. "Next stop, Eau Claire," he said. "Nice rest area by the river. Maybe stretch out the legs." He tapped the GPS on his phone. Emily nodded. "We've packed your medications and passports in a Ziploc," she said, as though I were a handful of paperwork. "Your suitcase is in the back." They both looked at me expectantly, as if I were to respond to their generosity. But all I felt was the hollow echo of my own voice. "Thanks," I whispered. "Just thanks." We left another 30 minutes later, and I shuffled back into the SUV's rear bench, wrapping my scarf tighter. Emily tucked her legs beside her on a separate cushion. I stared at the passing fields, feeling each mile like a mile away from home. At one rest stop, I stretched my legs by the river's bank, dew-cold grass under my shoes, the water nipping at the stones with a gentle splash. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the ocean breeze with Mom, how she led me to the tide line and said, "Don't fear the cold. It'll wake your blood." But here, it just felt cold. I thought of the lighthouse beam cutting through the fog, a steady promise of guidance. I wanted that beam now more than a fishing trip or stiff soup. Back in Minneapolis traffic, I watched Emily's reflection in the rearview mirror. Her jaw set, she tapped her fingers on her phone again. Michael talked business on a hands-free call, logistics for the cottage, the rental contract, extra fees for linens. Everything was arranged, budgeted, choreographed. Even my journey felt relegated to a line item. I slid my hand into my pocket and felt the smooth leather of my passport cover. Within it lay the proof of my own life. Beyond these crisp instructions, stamps from Japan, Spain, the Panama Canal, places Mom and I had dreamed of but never reached. I flicked it open and saw my name, my photo. A younger face, stubbled with excitement, and I felt a surge of defiance. They wouldn't control me completely. I would still be me, ragged coat or not. I would still taste fish if I wanted to, and if this trip was a test, I would pass it on my terms. The SUV hummed along Interstate 94 gray skies, pressing in. But behind the clouds, I sensed the possibility of sunlight. I closed my eyes for a moment and breathed deeply. When I opened them, the road stretched before me like an invitation. Emily and Michael sat ahead, each absorbed in their little worlds. I straightened my jacket, tugged the scarf until it felt comfortable, and leaned back, resolved to navigate this journey with both caution and courage. The miles clicked by each one, carrying me further from home and closer to a truth only I could claim. I would keep my wits about me. I would honor Mom's memory, and I would remind them, if the moment came, that I am still Oberon Hollis, not a project to be managed, but a man with stories yet to tell. I woke before dawn in the cottage, the thin mattress creaking beneath me as I sat up. The small bedroom smelled faintly of lavender, Emily's idea, no doubt, to make the place homey. I rubbed my eyes and peered out the window. Pale gray light spilled onto weathered shingles, and the Maine coast rolled out beyond in soft layers of mist and rock. I dressed quietly, easing into my jeans and the sweater I'd packed, then crept down the narrow hallway toward the living area. Voices echoed faintly from the patio. Emily's tinkling laughter, Michael's deep baritone. They were out there already, off on their first adventure. I pressed my palm to the door frame and listened. "I swear, Michael, if you buy another bottle of Pinot Noir, I'm divorcing you," Emily said, her tone playful. He laughed. "Bring it on. Just you and me, babe." They poured out into the morning light and shut the French doors behind them. Their laughter tumbled through the cottage like a ribbon I wasn't allowed to touch. I stood alone in the foyer, the silence settling around me. I drifted to the kitchen. 3 sandwiches wrapped in wax paper sat atop the counter, tuna salad on rye, the note read. I poured myself a glass of water and took a tuna sandwich, but my appetite had vanished. Instead, I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the French doors, peering at their backs as they rounded the corner of the patio. They were off to a winery, I'd been told last night. Tasting tour, Emily had said. You wouldn't enjoy it too much walking. I bit the sandwich anyway, the mayonnaise cool on my tongue, and forced myself outside. Gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked down the short path to the beach, a rocky cove strewn with granite boulders and patches of sand. The tide was low seawater, pooling in tide pools that held anemones and starfish. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp as broken glass. I stepped into the shallows, water lapping around my sneakers. I watched a tiny crab scuttle beneath a rock and thought of Mom catching crabs with me as a boy, tickling their bellies until they scurried back to their crevices. I sighed and the sea breeze snatched it away. I wandered along the shoreline, picking my way over kelp-slick stones. The cottage felt worlds away, a place where I had no role except that of powerless observer. Emily and Michael didn't ask if I wanted to join them. They'd packed my medications, my passport, my credit card tucked into a plastic bag, but no invitation had been offered beyond those first morning instructions. Everything was arranged except for me. A wave lapped at my ankles, and I dug my toes into the cold sand. I closed my eyes for a moment, imagining Mom's voice. You belong wherever you choose. But I hadn't chosen this solitude. I pushed off the sand and continued walking, the ache in my chest growing heavier with every step. By midday, the sky had brightened to a crisp blue. I saw the winery in the distance, a whitewashed barn with rows of grapevines curling toward the sun. Through the French doors, I could almost picture them swirling glasses of red wine, nodding appreciatively, clicking bottle stoppers with polite murmurings. I found a long driftwood log and sat down, brushing sand from my jeans. I took out my phone, half expecting a message. "Hey, Dad, you okay?" But there was nothing. No texts, no calls. I scrolled through my messages to Emily. The last was her cheerful reminder. Don't miss us too much. Lunch is in the fridge. I stared at the screen, my fingertips aching to dial her number, but I put it away. Instead, I pulled out the photo I carried in my wallet. Mom and me on Cape Elizabeth, her arms wrapped around my shoulders, as we watched the lighthouse beam sweep across the black water. I traced her smiling face with my thumb. If you can't beat loneliness, she'd said, you can paint it into something beautiful. I blinked back tears and tucked the photo away. I watched as a family of 4 teens and their parents ambled down the beach. The kids kicked at driftwood, squealing with youthful energy. The parents walked hand in hand, exchanging quiet words. I envied their togetherness. I wondered if this was how it felt to feel wanted. I rose and wandered back toward the cottage, pausing at the patio. A glass rested on the railing Merlot, according to the deep red stain at the bottom. I picked up the glass gingerly and sniffed it. The scent was fruity, heady, not unlike the time I'd surprised Mom with a bottle of sparkling cider on our anniversary. She'd laughed, mistaking it for champagne, and we toasted sunset out the kitchen window. I set the glass back down and pressed my hand to the warm wood. Nobody had asked whether I liked wine or wanted to try their selections. Nobody had offered me a ride in the vineyard tractor or a lesson in grape harvesting. It was as though I existed only when convenient, a prop for Instagram photos or a footnote in their itinerary. I stepped inside, setting the glass on the counter, and went back to the small living room where 3 chairs faced the ocean view. I sank into one, the cushions sighing beneath me. I picked up a dog-eared novel from the side table, but the words swirled without meaning. I put it down and leaned forward, folding my arms on my knees. In that silence, I felt my heart pounding, a mixture of anger and sorrow swirling in my veins. Part of me wanted to send a text, "I'm leaving. Pick me up now." But another part understood that wouldn't work. They had their plans, and I was a passenger on their journey only to the extent they permitted. I glanced at the clock, 3:30. They'd be back by 5, maybe later, with sighs of contentment and stories of lush vineyards. The sunset tasting the art of pairing notes, the gentle hum of colleagues sharing weekend getaways. I would be tucked away upstairs, my footsteps muffled on the old carpets. I rose and wandered into the kitchen. The refrigerator held 3 unlabeled water bottles, 2 sandwiches, and a carton of orange juice. I poured a glass of juice and drank deeply, the sweetness tangling with my bitterness. I opened the fridge door again and found a large bowl of fruit salad, berries, melon, pineapple. I spooned a biteful and chewed, imagining Mom's voice. Bright flavors for brighter days. I closed my eyes, savoring the mix of sweetness and acidity. Downstairs, I had access to a phone booth by the front door, but no signal for outbound calls. I remembered Mom telling me about old coin phones that still worked with quarters. But here in this modern cottage, even that relic was gone. I leaned against the wall, imagining being stranded on a deserted island, allowed to observe but never to be part of the experience. I wandered upstairs and peeked into their room. 2 elegantly made twin beds, crisp linens, a small writing desk with postcards that read, "Wish you were here," all in Emily's neat cursive. I closed the door and moved on, heart-sinking. Back in my room, I sat by the window and watched the light fade toward evening. The ocean, a patch of silver in the distance, reflected the sky's tangerine glow. I remembered twilight walks with Mom, our shadows long on the boardwalk, her hand warm in mine. I closed my eyes against the sting of tears and whispered, "I'm here, Mom. I'm trying." The cottage grew quiet as dusk settled. I heard the French doors open and soft footsteps in the hallway. Emily and Michael returned, cheeks flushed, glasses in hand. Their laughter broke the hush and rushed toward me. I stood in the doorway as they sat down at the counterplates of cheese and crackers laid out. Emily poured 2 glasses of wine and pushed one toward me. "Dad, you're back," she said brightly. "We missed you." I took the glass, but didn't drink. I stared at the deep ruby liquid the way it caught the lamplight. And in that moment I realized that invisibility, no matter how sharp, was sometimes the loudest hurt of all. I raised the glass in a gentle salute and managed a small smile. "Glad to be back," I said, voice steady. "Thank you for dinner." They nodded, and as I sipped the wine, its tannins a fierce reminder of half-truths, I resolved to reclaim my place in this story. This was my journey too, and I would be more than a background prop. The ocean outside murmured its steady song, and I pressed my forehead against the cool window pane. Tomorrow, I would step forward on my own terms in my own time into the chapters yet unwritten. I woke to the pale wash of morning light filtering through the lace curtains. My throat was dry and every muscle ached, but the deeper ache was in my chest, an unease I couldn't shake. I swung my legs off the narrow bed feet touching the floor's chill plank and walked into the kitchenette. The note on the formica countertop was scribbled in Emily's precise hand. "Went out sandwiches in fridge. Don't miss us. B." I stared at it, my heart stalling. No love, no explanation, just brusque letters and a single initial. I opened the fridge with trembling fingers. 3 sandwiches wrapped in wax paper lay on a plate, turkey on wheat ham and cheese, and a peanut butter and jelly, my favorite from childhood. I closed the door and turned to the window where the ocean's slate-gray expanse stretched beyond a low deck. No sign of them. The chairs were empty, a few crumbs decorating the tabletop. I touched my pockets, aware in sudden alarm that my wallet was missing. My identification, my credit card, my pension card, all gone. My passport, which Michael had insisted I pack, was nowhere in sight either. "Don't miss us." The words echoed like a taunt. I sank into a chair, cold, seeping through my sweater. My mind raced. They'd taken my papers and my money and left me here alone 1,000 miles from home. Panic rose in my throat. I set the note down and pressed a shaking hand to my forehead. My vision blurred as I tried to steady my breath. "This can't be real," I whispered to the empty room. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through contacts, thumb hovering over Emily's name. My finger tapped her number, rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. I left a terse message. "Please call me back, right away." I sank onto the couch, head in hands, listening for her voice that I knew wouldn't come. I tried calling Michael, next same result, straight to voicemail. I stood and paced my footsteps, muffled by the threadbare rug. The salt air drifted through the open patio doors, mingling with the scent of brewing coffee. Sarah's old percolator sat on the counter, perhaps left by intention or habit. I pressed my hand to the cool metal, hoping the rich aroma would ground me, but it only reminded me of what they'd stolen. Not just my documents, but my sense of security. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply. I had to think. I remembered the tourist brochures strewn on the coffee table last night. Maps, timetables, lists of local attractions. I rifled through them now, searching for addresses, bus stations, train stops, anything that could get me back to civilization. The brochures advertised a Kennebunkport transit hub with daily buses to Portland and onward to Boston. But without my passport or card, how would I pay? Where would I sleep? My hands trembled as I realized the extent of my vulnerability. I forced myself to sit at the small kitchen table, taped one of the brochures to the wood, and ran through scenarios. I could hike down to town and find a payphone, though those were relics and I doubted I'd find one. I could knock on a neighbor's door and ask to use their phone. My heart twisted as I considered the scene, an 80-year-old man standing on a stranger's doorstep, cap in hand, asking for help. Would they believe me? Or would they think I was lost, senile, a story for headlines? My stomach rumbled with hunger, not for the sandwiches, but for the sense of agency they'd stolen. I soaked one slice of bread in coffee, nibbling it as I stared out at the rolling tide. The gulls wheeled overhead, indifferent to my plight. I thought of Sarah and the way she'd comfort me after a rough day, whispering that I was capable of more than I knew. A sudden determination stirred in me. I stood and grabbed my jacket from the hook by the door. In the pocket I found a crumpled receipt from a gas station, a scrap of paper with a phone number scrawled on it, the kiosk attendant's. I ran water over my hands but didn't wash it away. Maybe I could call that number, beg for $1 worth of call time. I tugged on my scarf and stepped out onto the deck, wind tugging at my hair, the ocean chanting a relentless mantra. I dialed the attendant's number from the receipt. "Hello?" A groggy voice answered. "Mr. Carmichael, this is Oberon Hollis. I was in Kennebunkport, staying at the cottage on Ocean View Drive. I'm in a bit of trouble. Could you tell me where the nearest public phone is?" Silence. "Then you're at the Riptide Cottage, boy. That's a ways out. Closest payphone's downtown near the post office. You'd have to catch a town shuttle or walk a couple miles." "Thank you," I said, voice cracking. I hung up and stared at the phone, grateful for a breadcrumb of information. I needed shoes. My slippers wouldn't cut it, and a plan for reaching downtown. I yanked open the fridge, grabbed the ham sandwich, and tucked it inside my jacket for later. Every crumb mattered now. I slung my bag over my shoulder and trudged down the wooden stairs, each step echoing through the empty house. I locked the door behind me, tucking the key into my pocket. The cottage looked too large for one person, just as Emily had said of our home back in Fargo. Now I stood here, oversized and underestimated, with only my wits to rely on. I trudged down the narrow lane toward the main road, sand crunching underfoot. My legs protested, but I pressed on, eyes fixed on the distant outline of Kennebunkport's town center. I pictured the old docks, the gift shops, and the post office. Maybe I could borrow a phone there. The march of seagulls overhead felt like a signal: move forward, keep going. I passed weathered, clapboard houses, whitewashed and shuttered for the season. Some porches bore rocking chairs. One had a neighbor's cat lounging in the sun. I stopped and petted the cat gently. It purred, oblivious to my troubles. I whispered, "Thank you, friend." I left a small deposit of my hope in its fur, then moved on. As I rounded the final corner, I saw a cluster of storefronts lining the street, a small cafe, a bookstore, and beyond them the red brick post office with the green-shuttered windows. My breath came in ragged gasps, but I felt alive, my mind clear with purpose. I crossed the street and entered the cafe first, the bell above the door tinkling. Inside, the barista looked up from polishing a mug. "Can I help you?" she asked kindly. I swallowed. "Ma'am, could I use your phone? I'm in a bit of trouble." My voice wavered. She studied me for a moment, then pushed a small telephone toward me. "Sure. It's local calls only, but you can probably reach a taxi." I dialed 911 reflexively, then caught myself, no emergency. I thought of my bank's customer service, the number on the back of my card, but that card was gone. I closed my eyes and dialed another number, the concierge at my bank in Fargo. At the beep, I left a message. "This is Oberon Hollis. Someone has taken my credit card and passport, abandoned me in Maine. Please block my accounts and call me back immediately." I hit end, trembling. The barista asked if I needed water. I nodded. She poured me a glass and handed it over. "You okay?" she said gently. I forced a grateful smile. "I will be. Thank you." I stepped outside, clutching the phone, walking toward the post office. The morning sun climbed higher, and I felt the first stirrings of hope. I wasn't helpless. I was stranded, yes, and vulnerable, but I was still me. Oberon Hollis, a man who had weathered storms bigger than this. With each step my panic receded, replaced by resolve. They may have left me here, but they hadn't broken me. I would find my way home. I stumbled onto the shoulder of the two-lane road, heart still hammering from the shock of being abandoned. The sky was a cool, pale gray, and the salty breeze tangled my hair around my ears as I flagged down the first passing pickup truck. The driver, a burly man in a faded baseball cap, pulled over, eyed me through the windshield, then rolled down his window. "You look like you could use a ride, sir," he said, voice warm with Midwestern drawl. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Thank you. I need to get into town, Kennebunkport. Any help would be appreciated." He nodded and waved me in. "Hop in the back. I'm heading that way." The truck's bed was lined with soft hay bales, and I settled between them, carefully grateful for the makeshift seat. The driver introduced himself as Hank and told me he ran the local feed store. We bounced along country lanes flanked by spruce and pine. He didn't pry, and I didn't volunteer. By the time he dropped me at the small Greyhound bus station, I'd memorized his number in case I needed another ride back. Inside the station, I scanned the departures board. A handwritten sign taped to the bulletin board caught my eye. "Portland bus leaves at 2:15 p.m. I glanced at my watch just after noon, 2 hours to kill. I fished in my jacket pocket for the folded receipt from the gas station attendant, and then remembered the half-remembered instruction, "You'll need an ID." In my wallet, I found only one card, my Missouri driver's license. The photo was 5 years old, silver hair instead of salt and pepper, but my name and birth date were clear. I approached the counter, clutching the license like a lifeline. The clerk, a teenage girl with a nose ring and kindness in her eyes, scanned the old card. "Still valid," she said with a nod, popping it back into my hand. "That bus is pretty empty today. 2 hours to Portland, then connections as far as you want." "You all set?" I managed a shaky smile. "Just as far as it goes. 1 ticket to Portland." She printed out a crumpled ticket. "Seat 12. Leaves from Bay 3. She winked. "Safe travels." I went outside and sat on a bench, tucking the ticket into my coat pocket. The station's walls were plastered with faded posters of Broadway shows and local fishing charters. I stared at them, thinking of Home Fargo's wide streets, the familiar bustle of the grocery store, Emily's occasional phone calls. It felt surreal that only hours before I'd been abandoned in this seaside town. The bus rolled in a long blue coach with luggage racks on top. I hoisted my backpack up, climbed the steps, and took seat 12 by the window. The driver, a wiry fellow named Carlos, greeted me with a curt nod. "Going far?" he asked, pulling out onto the highway. "A ways," I replied. "Portland first, then we'll see." He grunted. Not many passengers chatted with the driver, especially this late in the season. When the bus rumbled out of town, I watched the shoreline fade into the rolling hills of Maine. I pulled my jacket tighter around me as the temperature dropped with the afternoon light. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift. Memories came in flashes. Little Emily clutching my hand as we tiptoed through fall leaves at the park, her freckles dancing in the sun. Her shy grin the first time she called me Daddy, a sound that lit up my life. And then, darker memories. Emily's forced smile at Mom's funeral, the way she'd hugged me, but kept her distance, as though Mom's death was a business transaction. I winced, craving both those innocent days and the explanation I'd never get. In Bangor, a handful of people boarded tourists with cameras, a family headed for vacation. Several seats up, I saw a young couple whispering, sharing a map. Their bright energy rubbed against my raw edge of grief. I returned the ticket stub to my pocket and stared at my reflection in the window. An old man in a threadbare jacket, eyes tired but determined. I touched my driver's license photo and reminded myself this was only one segment of my journey. The bus stopped every 40 minutes or so at rest areas and service plazas. I used those breaks to stretch, to practice my legs on the asphalt, and to ask for directions to the next leg. At each pit stop, I carried my backpack, taking care not to leave behind my folded note from the gas station guy, the only clue to my lost belongings. By the time the sun dipped low and the sky turned pastel pink, we rolled into Portland's Greyhound Terminal, a squat brick building lit by flickering neon. I paid Carlos, nodded my thanks, and stepped off, swallowing sea air and gratitude in equal measure. Inside, the terminal buzzed with travelers. I approached the information board, scanning bus numbers and departure times: Chicago via Boston, a direct line to Minneapolis, even a route that could take me through Iowa. Each option felt like a lifeline thrown onto a stormy sea. My thumb grazed the schedule: Bus 42 to Chicago, departs 9:30 a.m. tomorrow, arrival 10:00 p.m. That sounded like work. If I could reach Chicago, then back home would be only 2 legs away. Chicago to Minneapolis, then bus or train to Fargo. It might take 3 days, but money was no object. I still had the cash I'd brought, and my card was reported stolen, but would be reissued. I stepped outside into the dusk. Portland's brick sidewalks were dotted with brew pubs and restaurants. I found a small diner still open, formica counters, vinyl stools, neon beer signs. I sat and ordered a cup of coffee and a bowl of clam chowder, one token nod to this coastal city's pride. The chowder was thick and rich, flecked with bacon and clams, and as I ate, I allowed myself a moment of comfort. The waitress asked if I needed anything else. I shook my head, murmured thanks, and stared at the window, the reflection of my weary face superimposed on the city's glow. Back at the terminal, I found a quiet corner and laid out a rough planned bus to Chicago, change to Minneapolis, then home. I took out my phone, no new messages, and sent a quick email to my bank and to my lawyer in Fargo. I'd be back soon. Please expedite replacement cards. I folded the email and slipped the phone into my pocket. I felt more anchored, a flicker of control returning. I slept in the terminal's sparse seating area that night, my backpack as a pillow. When I woke before dawn, the terminal was a hushed cathedral of travelers, some bleary-eyed, others already plotting their day. I showed my ticket to Chicago at the counter, found seat 15 by the aisle, and boarded a sleek coach that smelled of new leather and engine oil. The driver nodded, and we rolled out of Portland into the gray morning. The ride to Chicago moved through New England fields, upstate New York's rolling hills, then into the industrial sprawl of Pennsylvania and Ohio. Each state line felt both endless and momentous. I watched dawn turn to midday, to dusk again, listening to the engine's hum. Fellow passengers drifted in and out, business travelers tapping on laptops, families sharing snacks, late-shift workers heading home. I exchanged nods with a retired couple driving to their granddaughter's wedding in Minnesota. Their kindness warmed me. "You a pilgrim, sir?" the husband asked. I laughed. "Just trying to get home." In Chicago, the terminal buzzed with energy trains, buses, taxis weaving through crowds. I navigated to the Minneapolis bus counter and booked a seat for the overnight ride, recognizing the weary gratitude in my own voice. "1 ticket to Minneapolis, please." The agent handed me a receipt and a cup of coffee to go. I found a corner, sipped the dark roast black, and watched the city's heart beat around me. As the bus pulled away, headlights gleaming, I felt the miles homeward stretch before me. I watched Lake Michigan's dark waters slip by on one side and Chicago's skyline on the other, glittering like a promise. Through the tinted window I thought of home, Fargo's wide boulevards, the familiar stoop where the mail still waited. Emily's face, troubled, remorseful, loving whenever she called in the past. I'd carry that image back with me, a reminder of why I endured the journey. The long ride to Minneapolis passed in quiet reflection. I dozed, awakened by the driver's voice. Minneapolis, folks, 30-minute stop. I stretched and disembarked into the crisp night air, breathed deep, and found the next bus for Fargo. When I finally stepped off in my own city's depot, the sign overhead read, "Fargo Moorhead," in familiar letters. My knees shook, but I managed a smile. Outside, snow-dusted sidewalks led me toward home. I hailed a cab and gave the driver my address. As we sped down Broadway, I peered out the window at the streetlights, the storefronts, and felt a fierce joy swell in my chest. I was going back to my life, the house Sarah and I built, the memories locked in every floorboard, and I was coming back stronger. I reached into my pocket, touched my driver's license, and whispered, "I made it." Then I closed my eyes, ready to step through my own front door once more. I stepped into the familiar fluorescent lights of the bank, the soft murmur of tellers and the clack of keyboards greeting me like a half-forgotten tune. My heart pounded as I approached the counter where Eleanor, my longtime account manager, raised her eyebrows in concern. "Mr. Hollis," she said gently, "we've been trying to reach you. Unusual activity on your account." I nodded, my throat tight. "I'm aware. Someone made a $5,000 withdrawal in Portland 3 days ago, and then there was an attempted $20,000 transfer yesterday that was declined. I'd like to block the card immediately." Her fingers danced over the keyboard, and she set the card to blocked status with a few taps. "It's done. I can issue you a new card today, and I've arranged a preliminary report on any further withdrawals." She handed me a printed statement showing the Portland ATM withdrawal and the transfer attempt to Beatrice Hollis's account. I stared at her name, my daughter's name on the page. "I'd also like to close our joint account," I said, voice low, recalling the account Emily and I opened years ago for her college tuition, "and transfer the funds to my personal checking." Her expression tightened. "Are you sure joint accounts usually require both parties' consent?" I opened it, and I've been the only one depositing. There shouldn't be any legal impediment. My hands shook as I signed the forms. The balance was $27,400, all mine, a silent testament to years I'd spent funneling money into my daughter's life without thanks. Eleanor paused, concern flickering in her eyes. "If you're certain. But you might want to consult with your lawyer. Family finances can get complicated." I nodded, clutching the bank documents like armor. "Thank you, Eleanor. I appreciate your help." Outside the bank, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Fargo's air, crisp with the promise of autumn, filled my lungs as I made my way to Martin Seffield's law office down the street. My cane clicked on the sidewalk, a staccato rhythm echoing my resolve. Martin greeted me in the warmth of his cluttered waiting room walls, lined with law books and framed diplomas. He led me into his office where the window overlooked the city park. I sank into the leather chair and set the bank papers on his desk. "What's on your mind, Oberon?" he asked, folding his hands. His voice was steady, practiced. I leaned forward, voice tight with anger. They took my card, tried to move 20 grand, and left me stranded in Maine. But that's not the worst of it. I need to know what rights I have regarding Emily's house. He raised an eyebrow. Their house. You mean the one in Maplewood? I nodded. The one I helped finance 8 months ago. I was co-borrower on the mortgage. I signed the papers without reading them. They said it'd make bank approval easier and that I'd be co-owner. But since then, I've never set foot in that house. I want to know what legal status I have. Martin stood and rummaged in a filing cabinet, pulling out a thick folder. He flipped through a few pages. Here we are. According to this deed, you and your daughter and her husband are equal owners, 1/3 undivided interest each. You hold an equal share in the property. I blinked. Undivided interest. So I actually own part of the house, not just the mortgage liability. He nodded. Yes. And there's a clause here. Any major decisions, sale, transfer of ownership, require unanimous consent of all co-owners. But Section 3.2 also states that in the event of disagreement, any co-owner may petition the court for a partition or forced sale. The proceeds are then divided according to ownership shares. My blood boiled at the thought of forcing them to sell the home they'd never let me into. So I can force a sale. In theory, yes, Martin said, pushing his glasses up. But you'd be required to show cause. Given the circumstances, you were abandoned in Maine, your funds misappropriated. You'd have a strong argument that their actions breached the fiduciary duty inherent in co-ownership. The court would consider your claims seriously. I exhaled the weight of that information, settling like iron in my chest. What if I just sell my 1/3 share to a third party? Martin nodded. That's another option. A co-owner can sell their interest without needing the consent of the others, though that usually means offering it first to existing co-owners. If they refuse, you can sell to an outside buyer, but a buyer would be cautious buying a share in a property where they don't control the whole. The price would reflect that discount. I tapped my fingers on the desk. The idea of watching a stranger move into my daughter's home was oddly satisfying, and if they object, Martin leaned back. They could challenge the validity in court. But given that you have clear ownership and they can't show you relinquished your interest, they'd be on shaky ground. Worst case, we litigate. Best case, they buy you out or agree to a full sale that benefits all parties. I closed my eyes, picturing the house in Maplewood, the manicured lawn, the stone walkway, the windows where my name was etched in official records. I'd poured $50,000 into that down payment. It had never been just a gift. I want to move forward, I said firmly. I want to sell my interest, and if they refuse, I want to force the sale. Martin smiled, admiration flickering in his eyes. I thought you'd say that. We'll start by drafting a formal notice of intent to sell. We'll notify them by registered mail, and they'll have 30 days to respond. If they don't agree, we file a partition action. I'll handle the filings and represent you in court. I nodded, relief and anticipation mingling in my chest. Thank you, Martin. And what about the car that's been sitting in my garage? He raised an eyebrow. Thornton's SUV. You mentioned something about that. I reached into my bag and pulled out the registration papers, the ones he'd asked me to sign last year for tax reasons. My name and his were both on them. They've left it here unused for over a year. I've paid all the taxes and insurance on it. I'd like to claim it as abandoned property. Martin thought for a moment, then said, Under North Dakota law, if a vehicle remains on your property for more than 6 months and you've made reasonable efforts to contact the owner, you can file for an abandoned vehicle claim with the DMV. After 30 days, title can be transferred to you. My lips curved into a small smile. That works. I'll handle that next. He jotted notes. And lastly, your joint account. If you've already closed it at the bank, that's fine. But if any disputes arise, you'll need those bank records to show all the deposits were yours. I reached into my suit pocket for the closing documents. I have them right here. Martin stood and extended his hand. You have a plan. I'll draft the notice and prepare the filings. You'll meet Veronica Page, the realtor I recommended, to get an appraisal. Then we'll proceed with the sale. I shook his hand, feeling a surge of vindication. Thank you, Martin, for everything. He offered a sympathetic smile. Rest assured, Oberon, you're not alone in this. We'll ensure your rights are protected. I left the lawyer's office with a folder full of paperwork and a head full of strategy. The late afternoon sun painted the sidewalks gold as I walked back toward home. My steps were lighter than they'd been in days. The betrayal I'd felt in Maine and the indignity of losing my documents were still fresh wounds, but now I had a path forward, a reckoning to pursue. At home, I set the papers on my kitchen table and sat down with a cup of coffee. I sipped slowly, tasting triumph beneath the bitterness. Emily and Michael may have tried to leave me stranded and strip me of my rights, but they had forgotten one thing. Blood ties didn't override the law. My life's work, the house they bought, was mine as much as theirs. I would claim what was rightfully mine, and in doing so, reclaim my dignity. I stared out the window at the quiet street of Fargo, the leaves turning red and gold. A chill wind rustled the branches, carrying the promise of autumn's resolve. I pressed my palm to the glass and whispered, I'm coming for what's mine. The echo of my voice sounded strong and certain, and I knew this legal awakening would be the turning point in my story. I woke before sunrise and dialed Jenna Price's number, my heart thrumming with a mix of nerves and anticipation. When she answered, her warm voice brought a surprising comfort. Mr. Hollis, good to hear from you. I've reviewed your deed, 1/3 ownership, and I can meet you at the Maplewood property this afternoon. She arrived just after lunch in a sleek navy sedan, clipboard in hand. We stood on the sidewalk, the late summer sunlight filtering through canopy oaks, their leaves brushing the edge of the driveway. Jenna's eyes appraised the 2-story facade with a professional gleam. Beautiful neighborhood, she said. The schools, the parks, Maplewood always shows well. I nodded, swallowing a lump. It's meant to be a family home. I just haven't been part of it. She gave me a sympathetic smile. Let's see what your share is worth. We walked the perimeter in companionable silence. The lawn was manicured grass, trimmed to a uniform green, a koi pond tucked to one side. Jenna clicked through her tablet, noting dimensions, recent sales nearby. We went inside through the front door, her voice steady as she guided me from room to room. In the living room, sunlight streaked across hardwood floors that I'd helped refinish. I ran my fingers over the yellowed floorboards, recalling family movie nights and Christmas mornings. In this market, Jenna said, her tone factual, this house would list around $750,000. Your 1/3 share is roughly $250,000 before commissions or adjustments. My pulse jumped. $250,000 suddenly tangible. I closed my eyes for a beat. That's more than I expected. She put a hand on my shoulder. You did well, Mr. Hollis. Now we'll draft the notice to your co-owners. They'll have 30 days to decide. After that, we can move to partition. I exhaled, relief and resolve mingling. Thank you, Jenna. Let's proceed. As Jenna packed up, I stole one last glance around the sunlit foyer where Emily and Michael's laughter once echoed. I felt a pang, then a spark of vindication. This house, these walls bore my mark as much as theirs. The next morning I drove the old SUV, which had been tucked behind my garage since Christmas of last year, to the DMV office. Paperwork in hand, I faced an austere clerk behind bulletproof glass. "I'm filing an abandoned vehicle claim," I explained, voice firm. "The owner, Michael Thompson, co-registered this vehicle with me over a year ago, but it hasn't moved since." She peered at my documents, then keyed through her computer. "You've provided proof of mailing them notice." I handed her the certified mail receipt. "Yes, and several phone calls, all unanswered." She tapped more keys, then looked up. "Everything is in order. We'll process the claim. In 30 days, title transfers to you." I thanked her and left with a sense of satisfaction. The old Ford Explorer, Michael's pride and joy, now by right mine. It felt poetic. Later that afternoon, I returned to the bank to finalize the closure of my joint account with Emily. Eleanor recognized me immediately, concern flickering in her eyes. "Mr. Hollis back so soon?" I placed the bank documents on her desk. "Yes. I'd like to close the joint account and transfer the $27,400 balance into my personal checking." She scrolled through the account history and nodded. "All deposits were from you. I can start the closure process, should take about an hour." While she processed the paperwork, I sipped coffee in the waiting area and watched the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor. When she returned, she handed me the transfer confirmation. "There you go. The account is closed. The funds are in your personal account." "Thank you, Eleanor. I appreciate your help." I slipped the confirmation into my leather wallet and felt lighter, as if a chain had fallen away. That weekend, I rented a modest lakeside apartment on the far edge of town. The complex overlooked a serene stretch of water where geese glided in pairs at dawn. I hired movers to transport only my essentials, my favorite armchair, a small bookcase, and a few framed photographs of Sarah and the twins when they were young. The rest of my furniture, heavy oak tables, floral sofas, stayed behind, remnants of a life I was choosing to leave behind. As I unpacked, I disconnected the old landline and discarded my worn business cards. I stopped by the phone store and got a new number 1, not tied to any directory. Then I created a fresh email address, carefully not linking it to my old one. At each step, I felt the satisfaction of erasing the trails that led back to them. No more surprise visits, no more subpoenas, no more half-hearted calls. By Monday morning, the new apartment felt like home. I dusted the windowsill where the lake shimmered in early light and arranged fresh flowers in a slender vase, white lilies, Sarah's favorite. I set out a small tray of coffee supplies, the French press, 3 scoops of freshly ground beans, a little jar of salt. The ritual remained unchanged even as the location had. I brewed my first cup in the new kitchen, inhaled the aroma, and watched the steam curl upward. The bitterness was comforting, an anchor to everything familiar that remained mine. I sipped slowly, listening to the gentle lapping of water against the shore. I let the solitude wrap around me like a warm blanket, safe and unburdened. That afternoon, I met Jenna at her office to finalize the appraisal report. She handed me 2 bound copies, one for the court, one for me. "This is official," she said, tapping the cover. "We'll send your 30-day notice today." I tucked the report into my briefcase and shook her hand. "Thank you for everything, Jenna. You've made this easier than I expected." She smiled. "You're in control now, Mr. Hollis. You took back what was yours." Driving home, I felt the weight of months, the betrayal in Maine, the stolen funds, the bruised pride begin to lift. The road curved alongside the lake, and I rolled down the window to let the breeze wash over me. My new number, my new email, my new apartment, all symbols of my fresh start. I thought of Emily and Michael still waiting in Maplewood, unaware of the storm brewing in their mailbox. I parked beside a boat dock and watched a pair of loons glide across the still water, their calls echoing like distant memories. I felt a swell of gratitude for this chance to rewrite my own ending. No longer a passive figure in their drama, I was the author now. Back in my apartment, I placed the appraisal report next to the bank and DMV confirmations on my desk. It formed a neat little pile evidence of my quiet retaliation, each document a testament to the rights I'd reclaimed. I leaned back in my favorite chair, feet propped on the edge, and poured a second cup of coffee. The lake breeze rustled the curtains. I raised my mug and whispered to the empty room, "Here's to living on my own terms." The coffee's warmth spread through me, and I realized that retaliation, when administered with precision and patience, could taste as rich as victory. I set the mug down, looked out at the water, and felt for the first time in months true peace. I arrived at the courthouse just after 8, the red brick building looming over the square like a sentinel. My heart throbbed with a mix of dread and determination as I clutched the folder Jenna had prepared: the partition complaint service, affidavits, appraisal reports, and medical evaluations. The wind tugged at my scarf, and I paused on the steps to straighten it, reminding myself that I was not here to plead ignorance but to assert my rights. Inside, the foyer buzzed with murmured conversations and the scrape of briefcases on marble floors. I found the courtroom door, room 214, just as the bailiff ushered in a slender man in a charcoal suit, whom I recognized as Emily's attorney, Mr. Grayson. He nodded coolly in my direction, as though we were competitors on a chessboard. Behind him, Emily and Michael walked in their faces, taut with unease. I slid into a seat at the back, careful to keep my cane propped beside me, and unfolded the court-issued witness slip with a deep breath. Judge Rowland, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, entered exactly at 9. She acknowledged the attorneys, then looked down at her docket. "We have case 2025 CV 482 Hollis v. Hollis et al. Partition action," she intoned. "Mr. Logan will argue for the plaintiff. Mr. Grayson, you may present your motion to dismiss." I straightened my jacket and counted to 3 in my mind. Mr. Logan stood first, sliding the partition papers onto the bench. He spoke clearly, laying out the timeline: my co-ownership, the notice served 31 days ago, and their failure to respond. He walked the judge through the appraisal: $750,000 listing price, my 1/3 share valued at $250,000. Then noted the abandoned property claim on the SUV and the closure of joint accounts. "Your Honor," he concluded, "Mr. Hollis has been wronged financially and abandoned personally. We respectfully request an order compelling sale of the entire property and distribution of proceeds." He stepped back, and I caught his encouraging nod. My pulse steadied. Judge Rowland peered over her glasses. "Thank you, Mr. Logan. Mr. Grayson, your response?" Mr. Grayson rose, buttoning his jacket deliberately. "Your Honor, we move to dismiss on grounds of alleged incompetence. Mr. Hollis exhibits signs of age-related memory lapses. Our clients have evidence he was disoriented during their Maine trip, left alone, confused, unable to manage basic tasks. They believed he might lack capacity to make informed legal decisions." He leaned forward, voice low. "A co-owner's competence is a threshold issue. If Mr. Hollis is incapacitated, he cannot validly demand partition. A ripple passed through the courtroom. I felt a flush of anger, but reminded myself to remain calm. Judge Rowland nodded. "I will hear testimony on that issue first." "Mr. Logan, would you like to offer a witness on capacity?" Mr. Logan gestured to the door. "Yes, Your Honor. We call Dr. Nguyen, neurologist." Dr. Nguyen, a compact woman in a crisp lab coat breast pocket lancet at the ready, took the stand. She presented her report, a battery of cognitive tests she administered in Fargo 3 weeks earlier, all scoring within normal limits for attention, memory, and executive function. She described her patient interview, how Mr. Hollis recalled his medical history, accurately navigated complex tasks, and exhibited no confusion. Judge Rowland asked a few pointed questions about testing methods, comparative norms, and Dr. Nguyen answered confidently. Next up was Dr. Patel, the psychiatrist. He detailed his independent assessment, mood insight, decision-making capacity. He'd reviewed medical records and interviewed me twice, concluding I was of sound mind, with no evidence of dementia or impaired judgment. Then Dr. Castillo, a gerontologist, testified that my physical and mental health were stable, and that my injury history was consistent with aging but did not signify incompetence. Each doctor fielded cross-examination from Mr. Grayson, who tried to highlight a moment when I'd paused before answering a question or said I was tired after the long bus journey. But each time the experts stood firm, those were normal variations, not deficits. I sat in the gallery watching their calm professionalism, feeling pride bloom in my chest. After the medical witnesses, Judge Rowland recessed for lunch, giving everyone time to gather their thoughts. I stepped outside under a blue sky, sunlight warming my face. I saw Emily and Michael through the glass. She fiddled with her tablet. He tapped his foot. My chest ached at the sight, but also swelled with resolve. I turned away, walked to the courthouse fountain, and let the steady trickle of water remind me that time, like the law, flows inexorably forward. Back inside at 1:30, the judge called the case. She listened as Mr. Grayson offered his client's own statements. Emily insisted she'd only left me in Maine out of fear I'd wander off. Thornton claimed I'd been unsteady on my feet at lunch. She argued those incidents demonstrated need for guardianship rather than partition. Then Mr. Logan presented my written testimony. The Maine experience framed as betrayal, the legal filings, the realtor's appraisal, the abandoned vehicle decree, bank statements. He tied it all together with a clear narrative: a daughter and son-in-law who sought to exploit and then desert their elderly co-owner, and a man who responded lawfully and decisively. Judge Rowland nodded and thanked counsel. "I have heard sufficient evidence on the capacity issue. The court finds that Mr. Hollis is competent to participate in these proceedings. I now turn to the partition request." She paused, folding her hands. "Given the failure of co-owners to agree to sale and the equitable interest of each party, I am compelled to grant partition by sale. The property shall be listed at a minimum of $700,000. Upon sale, proceeds shall be divided into thirds, $230,000, $333.33 to each owner." A hush fell over the courtroom. I felt my breath catch, then exhale in a wave of relief. Jenna squeezed my shoulder from the counsel table. Mr. Grayson frowned but did not object. Emily's eyes glistened with tears, anger or regret, I couldn't tell. Michael stared straight ahead. I rose, approached the judge's bench, and bowed slightly. "Thank you, Your Honor." She nodded curtly. "Clerk, please prepare the formal order." Then she dismissed us. Outside, Jenna embraced me, her enthusiasm uncontained. "You did it," she said. "Justice prevailed." I nodded too, moved for words. As I stepped into the afternoon sun, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. The next steps would involve closing the sale and collecting my share, but this moment, the courtroom showdown, had been the crucible in which I reclaimed my dignity. Justice had been served, and with that order in hand, I could finally close the chapter on betrayal and begin a new one on my own terms. I was heading home from the cafe where I'd lingered over a lukewarm tea, letting the afternoon sun wash away the last of my courtroom tension, when I heard the screech of brakes behind me. I glanced over my shoulder to see a black SUV swing onto the street, its tires carving a harsh arc in the asphalt. The door flew open and Emily stormed out. Her cheeks flushed, her tailored blazer brushing against her chin. Michael climbed down more slowly, his posture stiff and threatening. I paused mid-step on the cracked sidewalk. The world around us seemed to hush. A passing cyclist slowed, and two tourists with cameras froze with their lenses aimed at the scene. I drew a steadying breath, unclenched my right hand, and turned to face them. There was a moment, an electric heartbeat where Emily's expression flickered between fury and hurt. Then she straightened, thrust her hands onto her hips, and shouted, "How could you do this to us, to our family?" Her voice echoed off the brick storefronts. A few pedestrians cast sideways glances. One elderly woman touched her purse as if clutching a rosary. I folded my arms, lifting my chin so that the late afternoon sun glinted off my silver hair. "How could I echoed, my tone calm but firm. "I paid the down payment. It's my house, too." "You?" Michael began, but Emily cut him off, her eyes blazing. "You stole our home. You forced the sale our home." She took a step toward me, the heel of her stiletto clicking ominously. "That house was supposed to be our future. You ruined us." I felt a surge of pity as well as something fiercer vindication. "Your future," I repeated, but more softly. "That home holds my future, too. It was never just yours, Emily." A hush spread as more onlookers paused to watch a teenager stop texting a man walking his dog, tugged on the leash to stand still. Emily's voice shook. "We took care of you. We tried to protect you. Protect me." I could barely keep the scorn out of my voice. Leaving me stranded in Maine was protection. Taking my card and passport for safekeeping was protection. I shook my head. "Is that how you care for your father?" My voice grew quieter but somehow more powerful. "I was capable. I managed just fine without you." Michael cleared his throat, the sound harsh. "You're making this a bigger issue than it is. It was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I cut in, stepping closer so that Emily instinctively took a half step back. "Leaving me alone in a strange town thousands of miles from home with no funds, that was a mistake? Or was it part of your plan to have me declared incompetent?" The words were out before I could soften them. I saw Emily's face go ashen. Michael's jaw tighten. Emily began. But Michael stepped forward. "Enough of this melodrama," he snapped. "We're still family. You can't just wipe us from your life." I folded my arms again, the fabric of my jacket creaking. "Family," I said, letting the single word hang between us. "A family doesn't abandon one another. A family doesn't scheme to control each other's finances. A family doesn't try to steal from its own." Pedestrians along the street lingered, some shaking their heads, others whispering as they passed. Emily's eyes brimmed with tears now, angry, bitter tears. She looked at Michael as if searching for support, but all I saw was his tight-lipped resolve. I realized in that moment they both feared me. Not respect, but fear. They'd always measured me by my bank account, not by my personhood. Softly I said, "I don't want your apologies. I don't want your explanations. I want you to leave me alone." I looked at Emily with sorrow rather than anger. I used to dream of watching my grandchildren grow up in that house. Now I'm content to watch the sunset over my lake and know I'm not a burden to anyone. My voice cracked on the last word, and I felt tears prick my eyes, but I held my ground. Emily opened her mouth as though to argue, but the words caught in her throat. Michael glanced at the gathering crowd, his face colored with shame. For a breathless second I thought he might step forward to choke me, but instead he turned away and nodded at Emily. She took one last shaky step toward me, her mouth trembling, then spun around and climbed back into the SUV. I watched the door slam, the engine roar, and the car peel away, tires kicking up dust. The gravel pocked the pavement as they sped down the street, headlights fading around the corner. The hush lifted as the cyclist pedaled on, the tourists resumed their snapshots, and the dog walker continued down the block. Life resumed, but I felt a lightness inside, as if the weight of their betrayal had finally been lifted. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, the echo of Emily's last look still blazing in my mind. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the notice of partition, the appraisal report, and the court's final order. The paper felt crisp, official, and unbreakable, just like my resolve. I tucked the documents away and straightened my jacket. The late afternoon light was soft now, gold and forgiving. I inhaled the cool air, smelled the faint tang of coffee from the cafe across the street, and felt a quiet pride bloom within me. I had stood up for myself, legally, yes, but also with the dignity Sarah taught me to carry. I turned and walked down the block toward the taxi stand, each step echoing with purpose. People bustled around me, busy with their own lives, their own worries. I smiled gently at a child peeking from behind her mother's skirt, and the child smiled back unafraid. A passerby nodded as I paused to cross the street. As I reached the corner, I realized that while I'd ended one chapter in a storm of confrontation, I was now free to write the next one, defined by peace, by self-respect, and by the quiet knowledge that I am and always have been more than a bank account or a house. I pressed the crossing button, the light changed to white, and I stepped off the curb into the flow of life, confident that I was exactly where I needed to be. I woke to the gentle chime of the building's lobby clock, 8:00 a.m., just as the sun was peeking over the rooftops. I stretched in my modest bedroom where the morning light pooled on pale walls and took a moment to breathe. No more echoes of confrontations, no more courtroom dramas cascading through my days. Just the quiet promise of another morning in my own space. Down in the living area, I poured myself coffee, 3 scoops, 200 milliliters, a pinch of salt, then carried the steaming mug to the window. Below, the community garden was already alive with neighbors tending their plots. Mrs. Hastings in her wide-brimmed hat, watering marigolds, Mr. Patel pruning his tomato vines. I smiled, savoring the normalcy. They didn't know my story, the long legal battle, the betrayal, the bitter confrontation with Emily and Michael. And that was exactly how I wanted it. I settled into my favorite armchair, a soft beige swivel piece that I'd chosen for its comfort and compact size. It faced both the window and the small bookcase where I'd shelved favorite novels and my wife Sarah's old art supplies. On the top shelf sat her watercolor set, still vibrant with dried blooms of magenta and lapis. Next to it was a faded photograph of her hair pinned back with a paintbrush, capturing her laughter as she painted the sunrise. I reached out and brushed my thumb across the glass. "Good morning, love," I whispered as though she were still beside me. The first few weeks in this apartment had been a balancing act of logistics and soul-refreshing routines. I met with the moving crew to offload the last boxes containing my clothes and a few treasured antiques, the mint-condition record player Sarah and I had unearthed at a flea market, and the mahogany side table where our wedding album rested. I told the foreman, a polite young man named Carlos, thanks. Just leave the boxes over there by the couch. He gave me a puzzled look but did as I asked. Later, I called Eleanor at the bank to confirm that all necessary transfers were complete. "Mr. Hollis," she said warmly, "your new account is fully active. We've set up automatic deposits for your pension, so you won't have to worry about checks." I thanked her and hung up, feeling the last tendrils of worry slip away. Financially, I was more secure than I'd been in years, over $300,000 in liquid assets, plus my share of the car sale and the closed joint account. But more than money, what I cherished most was the sense of control I'd reclaimed. One afternoon, I decided to take a stroll through the building's courtyard. It was a small oasis, paved paths winding between raised flower beds and clusters of benches. I paused at a corner where a younger couple sat with their toddler. The little girl reached out her chubby hand toward me. "Hi, mister," she squealed. I knelt down to her level. "Hello there," I said, my voice gentle. "What's your name? I'm Clara," she replied, pink cheeks glowing. "Do you like daisies?" I followed her gaze to a patch of white petals nodding in the breeze. "I do," I said. "They remind me of my wife's favorite flower." Her mother approached, breezing a lock of hair behind her ear. "That's sweet. My name's Anna. We live next door." I straightened and offered my hand. "Oberon Hollis. Nice to meet you both." Anna shook my hand warmly. "Welcome to the building, Mr. Hollis. If you need anything, recommendations for local services, good doctors, just let me know." I smiled, heart-warming at her genuine kindness. "Thank you, Anna. I appreciate it." She beamed at her daughter. "Let's go, Clara." As they ambled off, Clara waved furiously. I waved back, feeling as though I'd just been welcomed into a small village. No judgments, no past grudges, only neighbors sharing daisies and sunlight. Back in my apartment, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and sat at the small kitchen counter, reading Anna and Clara's faces in my mind. It struck me how simple greetings could stitch fresh beginnings into the fabric of daily life. I was free now to forge new connections to shape my routine without fear or resentment. That evening the mail arrived, the usual assortment of bills, advertisements, and a single postcard. I recognized the floral stationery immediately, Lily's handwriting too neat to be mistaken. I unfolded the card and read, "Dear Grandpa, thank you for telling the truth. I'm proud of you. Love, Lily." My hands trembled as I read the words, and a swell of pride and relief washed over me. My granddaughter, whom I hadn't seen in years, had reached out. The card was unsigned with no return address, but I knew it must have come after our brief meeting in court, the two witnesses she'd brought along her quiet observation in the gallery. She'd seen me stand up for myself, and she'd acknowledged it. I carried the postcard into the living room and tucked it beside Sarah's photo on the bookshelf. The picture of my wife's radiant smile and Lily's note sat side by side, a tether between past and present. I sank into my armchair, cradling my mug, and let the warmth seep through me. At that moment I felt the soft pulse of freedom, not just legal or financial, but emotional. I had reclaimed my dignity, and in doing so I'd mended a fractured piece of my heart. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a gentle routine. Mornings began with coffee and the newspaper, catching up on local stories and occasionally a crossword puzzle to keep my mind sharp. Midday, I'd explore the neighborhood, a small bookstore with creaky floors where I'd browse crime novels, a German bakery around the corner where I discovered the best rye bread since my youth, and a park bench by the lake where I would journal my thoughts. One afternoon, I ran into Anna again in the courtyard. "Mr. Hollis," she called, waving me over. "I'm baking a pie this weekend. Would you like a slice?" I smiled. "I'd love to." We shared a slice of apple tart, and sweet under the shade of an old maple. We chatted about community events, book clubs, and the best local fishing spots. Our conversation was light, punctuated by Clara's laughter when she joined us, proudly showing off a dandelion chain she'd made. I listened, comforted by the normalcy of it all. That evening, I drove out to the attorney's office to sign the final paperwork on the car. I handed over the transfer forms to the DMV clerk, and she smiled. "Congratulations, Mr. Hollis. Enjoy your new vehicle." I nodded, picturing the old Explorer, now bearing my name alone, a symbol of reclaimed independence. On my way home, I stopped by the realtor's office and received confirmation that the buyer for Maplewood would close in 3 weeks. Jenna's email said the check would arrive directly to my bank. I didn't feel triumphant, more like a weight had lifted and a chapter had closed. I was content. Back at the apartment, I stood by the window and looked out at the lake, its surface turning gold in the setting sun. I sipped the last of my coffee, now lukewarm but comforting, and felt a deep calm settle in my bones. For years I'd been driven by grief, betrayal, and anger. Now I was guided by peace. Before turning in for the night, I tucked Lily's postcard into a small wooden box beside Sarah's photograph. Inside, I had placed a few precious keepsakes: Mom's paintbrush, the chipped coffee mug, and now Lily's note, a testament to truth and love. I closed the box and took a slow breath, feeling the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. As I lay in bed, I reflected on the journey, the lawsuit, the partition, the abandoned vehicle claim, the severed joint account, and the final confrontation on that busy street. Each step had been necessary to reclaim not just money or property, but self-respect. I'd learned that freedom isn't just the absence of conflict, it's the presence of peace. The clock ticked softly, the room bathed in moonlight. I closed my eyes with a smile, grateful for this new beginning. Tomorrow, I would wake once more to the scent of coffee and the promise of simple joys, neighbors' greetings, pages of a good book, the ripple of water against the dock. And through it all, I would know that I had told the truth, and in doing so, set myself free.